Oh, hello, everyone. Here we are in Athena Lab, this time with General Mick Ryan from Australia. He's a retired Major General in the Australian Army, where he spent 35 years. He has advanced studies in defense and international relations in different countries. He's the author of the book War Transformed, and recently of the novel The White Sun War, which deals with a possible conflict between China, Taiwan, and the United States and their allies. Well, thanks, General, for this opportunity to talk about your recent novel. It's a fantastic book that I strongly recommend. We hope one day we can read it in Spanish. Maybe you have good news for us, but you can find it in English, and you're going to learn a lot reading this book about maybe the next war. So thanks, General. First question for you.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Why did you decide to write a novel to explain an eventual conflict and not a non-fiction book? And you describe in a scenario as soon as 2028, so it's very worrisome.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a lot previously about the future of warfare, and I published a book, War Transformed, in 2022 that looked at trends in military affairs and what that meant for building military institutions that could be successful in the future, from organizational, conceptual, and personnel and technological sides of things. But I've also been increasingly interested by the power of narratives. I mean, humans are storytellers. We have been since we lived in caves. And I think people respond to stories and they learn things that, they may resist in reading a non-fiction book. As my friend Peter Singer always says, it's kind of like blending up vegetables in your children's chocolate milkshake. They get good stuff out of it, whether they know it or not. And I think narratives are the same. And it was Peter Singer and August Cole's Ghost Fleet who I think really reinvigorated this genre. It's not a new genre. I mean, it started in the 1870s with a British general writing the Battle of Dorking, but it's kind of gone through highs and lows over the last 150 years. And I saw Ghost Fleet and some other books, and I thought, this is very powerful. And if I kind of combine it with my work in War Transformed, maybe we can educate a wider audience of people beyond just military officers about the perils, the challenges, and the opportunities of technologies and thinking differently about them.
I found it very interesting how some of the main elements of the current wars are reflected throughout the book. Let's start with drones, space, and cyberspace. How determinant is the technology in the warfare and interaction with the human factor?
Well, I think the human factor is always the most important in any war. It's humans who make the decision to go to war. It's humans who fight it ultimately, whether directly or indirectly with machines. And it's humans who decide when it's over. And we shouldn't forget also it's humans who die and who are wounded, whether they're civilians or military personnel. But the technology aids them, and the autonomous capabilities that we're seeing rolled out in Ukraine are certainly not new. We've seen remote control weapons ever since the Second World War, but the wars spawned by 9/11 saw a massive expansion in the use of both aerial and ground remote control and semi-autonomous vehicles. And the Ukraine war, I think, is another significant leap forward in this capability. We've really seen an explosion in the number of types, from very tiny to very large, long duration, and the quantity that is being used. I mean, we're seeing thousands of these things being used at any one time, losing hundreds every day on both sides. Some are autonomous, some are semi-autonomous, some are, first-person video kind of things where it's almost like you're flying these things that have a RPG or a grenade attached. So I think there's a lot we can learn just because of the pure mass of these autonomous systems are being used will change tactics. It will change how we train and educate our military leaders. And ultimately, it will change how military institutions balance crewed and uncrewed systems, whether they're lethal systems or support systems. These things are going to become pervasive, and then they're going to be the majority of military machines in just about every military in the world.
And in the same sense, how important are the warrior skills and honor these days? In the book, you can find honor in all the military forces, regardless of whether they're from US, China, Australia, Taiwan. Something that is difficult to understand for civilians these days.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of bits to that. I mean, this has always been part of the military profession. I mean, whether you look at its modern manifestations since the first industrial revolution or all the way back to, the Greeks and beyond, honor has been a very important part of an individual's ethos for service, but also building teams. And ultimately, it is about balancing the honor of a person, the honor of a team, and the honor of one's nation who one served. And, that can manifest in lots of different ways. But ultimately, in modern military institutions, it generally is comprised of, values. It's comprised of a professional ethos. It's about adherence to the laws of war and the standards of behaviour that are expected by our citizens who we are drawn from and who we serve. So it remains a really important part of military institutions, whether we call it honour or not. The concept is a vital one if you want to build a successful, effective, cohesive military institution now, in the past, and in the future.
It's also clear that the scenario of short wars made us think that the stocks of arms and ammunition were not so important, but you suggest the industrial military capabilities or capacities is key to sustain a war. Do you think the war in Ukraine changed that perception? Because you can notice in the book.
Yeah, no, I do talk about that. And the reality is Ukraine has reminded us of this. It's not a new idea. We saw this at the beginning of the First World War when no one expected that war to go for a very long time. I mean, the von Schlieffen plan from the Germans was all about, a quick war concept of getting it over. There was a shell shortage on both sides, but particularly on the Allies' side in the first half of the war. The same was in the Second World War. It took time, particularly for the British and the Americans, to ramp up production. But once they did, I mean, that production overwhelmed the capacity of the Nazis and the Japanese to produce everything from ships to planes to munitions to jeeps to tanks. And, it's a contemporary lesson because the last 25 years we've fought a succession of short conventional wars that haven't required deep stockpiles of munitions, large-scale mobilisation of our citizens. I mean, they've been largely fought with the all-volunteer forces, the Americans call it, not conscripts. So this is a reminder in this war that, that construct may not be survivable in the future if we do have to go to a large-scale conflict against a major power. Indeed, I don't think an all-professional force will be capable of dealing with it. That all-professional force, just like the British Army of 1914, will disappear in 6 to 12 months. They'll all either be dead, wounded, or training people. So we're going to have to rethink how we bring people in, how we expand our forces and train them much more quickly than the extent, bespoke, and almost exquisite training, education, and professional development models that were used in the all volunteer forces in most Western countries.
I don't want to make spoilers, but we can say that the climate change has an important role in the plot. In your opinion, how should the armed forces internalize this reality of climate change?
Yeah, I mean, in many respects, when I decided to write this book, I wanted it to be about the two great challenges of the 21st century. You know, from my perspective, the two great challenges that humans have to face in the 21st century is climate change and the impact of authoritarian regimes. And in some respects, the book is about balancing those two. But it's also about saying to military readers, saying, hey, I know we got to focus on high-level warfighting. I'm not suggesting that. But in the background is going to be this threat that at some point we are going to be involved in dealing with, whether that is our budgets being cut for climate mitigation issues, or the use of military forces as part of humanitarian assistance, disaster relief forces. So, you know, we need to focus on high-level warfighting, but we must not forget that we will also probably have a role in the wider fight to address the impacts of climate change across the century.
And in the book, big difference appear when it comes to alliances and interoperability. Why do you think China has more difficulties in forming military alliances than the Western-oriented countries?
Yeah, it's fascinating that if you have a look at the United States, it has this web of alliances and coalition partners and security relationships throughout both Europe and Asia. And, you know, that is a relatively recent thing. That's only in the last 100 years that's happened. You know, before the Second World War, that web didn't exist at all. I mean, the Americans had, as we know, the rainbow planes of different warplanes, and you know, some of them included a war with Britain and a war with Canada. So in some respects, you know, that's kind of where China is now. Now, you know, I'm not trying to suggest an equivalency between the American and the Chinese approach, far from it. But, you know, the Chinese have for much of their modern history been inwards looking. Most of their challenges have been internal, and it's probably only in the last 2 decades that they've really focused on external challenges and threats, probably since the 1991 Gulf War. Their response to that, their strategic and political response, has been about building up the PLA as well as their security forces in both the physical as well as the technological and cyber sense. But I also think, you know, the Chinese political system, such as it is, doesn't really encourage an approach that would see it partner with other nations that might give them some level of leverage over China. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party is all powerful and all controlling, and any relationship with a foreign country that challenges that, or there's a perception of challenge to it, would not be seen as useful to them. So they're probably less willing to go into alliances, whereas the Americans are, as a democracy, are used to the rough and tumble of people expressing views, and that's what happens in alliances. Different allies, whilst we may share values, do differ on things, and the Americans are happy with that approach. We've seen that with NATO, we've seen that in the Pacific. So I think that's part of the issue, but I also think, you know, China's strategic culture is there's one country under the sun that's all powerful, that's them, and everyone is subordinate. It's certainly how it treats all its neighbours. So it's hard to imagine why any of its neighbours would ever want to become an ally with a country like that.
It seems to me that you are a little skeptical about the capabilities of the Australian armed forces, despite all the investments that are being made today. Do you think that the local authorities reacted too late to face the changing environment in the Indo-Pacific? I mean, I have many friends in the Australian Navy, but you talk about one-shot Navy in the book. That surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of a dig, but it's an informed one after 35 years. I mean, I think, unfortunately, in Australia, we judge the effectiveness of the military by how much we spend on it, which is an extraordinary amount. for what is a fairly small, bespoke military. And, you know, in the book, I do kind of take us to task on that. You know, we've been overly focused on things that come in 10 or 20 years, but not delivering short-term capability. And that's still very much the case. You know, we're developing these extraordinarily expensive nuclear-powered, conventionally armed submarines that will arrive at some point 10, 20 or 30 years down the track, when the real threat is now. And the investment now is basically flatlining in the Australian Defence Force. In fact, the current government, with the effects of inflation, it's actually having to cut investment. So, you know, we're kind of like we're in June 1939 and our government is focused on buying things for 1950, not for 1940. And I sought to kind of reflect that in the book. It really is a significant problem in our country.
Finally, General, I know you're are familiar with this book, Overall Defense Concept from Taiwan. Do you think this concept of overall defense from Taiwan is the answer to prevail in the next possible war? And what are the lessons from the Ukraine war in this concept, behind this concept?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to this. You know, clearly I have a bias towards this. I mean, I've met Admiral Lee Semin. I think he's one of the finest military theorists in the world today that has kind of been able to separate himself from, you know, strong traditional loyalties, not just to traditional Navy capabilities, but traditional military ones, to not get rid of them, but to better balance those conventional capabilities with some newer longer range strike autonomous systems. So I think his concept in 2017 was important when it came out. I think his concept is even more important now because Ukraine has proven his concept right. He's, you know, the elements of the overall defense concept, which are, you know, essentially firstly protect your military capability against first strike, the littoral battle, the beachhead battle, and then the mobilization of reserves for national resistance. You know, they're the four key elements. You look at that and you go, well, there's a lot of that in what the Ukrainians have done right. You know, they didn't have the littoral battle because the Russians were on their borders. But the other three elements have really been what they've been doing ever since the start of this war. So I think the overall defense concept, whilst not a template for every country in the region, including my own, I think it's a really good start for adaptation, because every military concept, right, is just a foundation for when a war starts. Once you start learning from the interaction between you and your adversary, you learn and you evolve and you adapt. But it's a really good start. It's probably the best one that you can provide at the moment. And I really look forward to it coming out in English so more people can actually read Admiral Lee Semin's work. I really think he's an important military theorist and strategist at the moment. And I think that there is much in this book that has been proved by Ukraine. One final point, you know, I was in Taiwan just a couple of months ago, and, you know, we spoke with the Admiral, we spoke with Foreign Minister and Deputy Foreign Minister, a lot of the National Security Committee for the President. And the overwhelming majority view was that the biggest lesson from Ukraine is demonstrating the will to resist. You must show other countries that you're willing to help yourself, regardless of whether they're willing to help you. You must demonstrate that national will first and foremost. I mean, the Ukrainians did that. They shocked the world, you know, with the president. I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. And he was saying, you know, one to his own people, I'm staying. I am you, I'm leading you. We're going to see this through. And he was saying to the Russians, this isn't going to be a walkover. And he was saying to the rest of the world, we're willing to fight, but we need your help. And I think the Taiwanese have really taken that lesson away from Ukraine. The degree to which that influences force structure, national security strategy, foreign relations, I guess will play out over the coming years. But I think if you blend that takeaway with the ideas in Admiral Lee Semin's work, You know, I think there's a very powerful defensive concept for the Taiwanese that should ensure, I hope, the head of the PLA and President Xi wakes up every morning and when thinking about Taiwan says, not today. And that would be a very important outcome of ODC as a deterrent.
Well, thanks, Jenner, for your time, for this opportunity to talk about your last book and these different issues that appears in your book. I strongly recommend it. And let me ask you a final question. You've been very productive, two books in 2 years. Are you working in a third book?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I am. It's sitting here with me. It's done in draft and is ready to go to the publisher on 1 August. It's a book about what we can take away from the war in Ukraine. And, you know, in some respects, it's very early days and it's hard to discern what are lessons that are relevant purely for this war and lessons that might have wider application. But the reality is military institutions are about constantly seeking sources of advantage. And we have to study this war every day from the beginning and take away what lessons we can, even if there's a risk at some point in the future, they may not have wider application. So this book is about informing that process. It starts on the 22nd of February, 2022 and wraps up at the beginning of the current Ukrainian offensive. And I'm sure at some point I'll provide an updated version, but I'm hoping that is out early next year so I can have 3 years in a row where I'm launching a book in the first half of the year. So that's my plan. But I also write weekly columns for the Sydney Morning Herald, the ABC, as well as my own Substack.
Well, thanks for your time again and congratulations. It's a great achievement, 3 books in 3 years. Thanks everyone and for follow Athena Lab. We also recommend to follow General Mick Ryan in social media and in his own personal website, Futura Doctrina. I think that's the one. That's the one. It's really good. So thanks, Aaron, and we hope to see you in Chile one day.
Yeah, I hope so too. It's great to talk to you.